We're ready to begin.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We are beginning the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight. Today is November 15th. I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Senator Clarence Lamb, to see if he has any introductions and to begin with the agenda. Thank you all for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chair Attar. So I don't have any introductory remarks. I think we have a busy agenda with folks from MDOT and USM and DBM here, so happy to go ahead and get started. Chair Attar, any remarks on your end?
No, thank you. We can begin.
All right, so first on the agenda, we have workplace bullying policies and practices. At the top here, we have the Maryland Department of Transportation. We're joined by Assistant Secretary Bridges. We also have Ms. Watkins Rhodes from the Office of Diversity and Equity, and Adrienne Monroe, also from the same office. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think we also had a presentation, a PowerPoint that we could share as well.
Yep.
So, there you go. Great.
That's it.
All right. So good morning to Chair Lamb and Chair Attar. Great to see you again. For the record, Tony Bridges, Assistant Secretary of Equity and Engagement for the Maryland Department of Transportation. I'm also joined by the Director for the Office of Diversity and Equity, Tracy Watkins Rhodes, and Adrienne Monroe, who's our EEO Program Manager. If you go to the next slide, just wanted to put in context that the Office of Diversity and Equity actually reports to me in the Secretary's office, while Human Resources, if you recall from the last hearing, I believe, Diana Rossborough, who's another Assistant Secretary, was on the call. She, along with Human Resources, we actually work together when it comes to investigations and trainings around workplace bullying. But the Office of Diversity and Equity within the Secretary's office coordinates many of the civil rights, equal opportunity, and fair practice activities for all of our MDOT organizations and modes. And you can see they're all listed here, from the port to aviation, transit, transportation authority, highway, and motor vehicle administration. What's not listed is also, and probably inferred, is the fact that they also oversee the activity of the Secretary's office as well. And so that oversight includes the discrimination and civil rights cases, as well as sexual harassment, ADA accommodations, and of course, what we're here to talk about today, which is workplace bullying. Tracy Watkins Rhodes, again, is the director of the office, and she's going to give the bulk of the presentation. But we also have Adrienne Monroe, who actually does a lot of the investigations here to answer any questions that you have. And so I will turn it over to Tracy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for giving us the opportunity. Next slide, please. So again, I forgot, for the record, I'm Tracy Watkins Rhodes. I'm the director of the Office of Diversity and Equity for the Maryland Department of Transportation. My office is located in the Secretary's office, what we affectionately call TSO or headquarters. So, and I'm here with Adrienne Monroe, as Tony mentioned earlier, Assistant Secretary mentioned earlier. So let me first start off by saying that MDOT's workplace bullying policy incorporates by reference the statewide policy on workplace bullying. So it mirrors the Maryland statewide policy. And however, the implementation that MDOT undertakes with the workplace bullying is divided between my office, the Office of Diversity and Equity, and the other fair practice offices, as well as our Office of Human Resources. We divide it into two components. The first component is training, and the second component is complaint investigations and reporting. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our Office of Human Resources is responsible for the implementation of the training component. Our policy requires mandatory workplace bullying training for all MDOT employees. This means state employees, contractors, and consultants. Training is completed as part of new employee onboarding, and again, every 2 years for everyone employed at MDOT. We we at the Secretary's Office uses a virtual platform. It's called MDOT University, and it's through a software called Cornerstone. That slide that you see, or that image, is a sample page that kind of lays out what the objectives of our workplace bullying training will provide for everyone taking the training. Next slide, please. Now, the second component of MDOT's workplace bullying is investigations and reporting, and that is implemented by our offices of civil rights or fair practice offices. Complaints are filed in the fair practice or civil rights offices of each mode, and then they're investigated by the civil rights investigators working in those offices. However, recognizing that individuals who are considering filing these kinds of cases may be sometimes uncomfortable with seeking assistance within the modes in which they are employed. As a result of that, MDOT employees are encouraged to contact my office at headquarters to request assistance. If appropriate, we will investigate the claim ourselves, or we'll send it back to the mode with some oversight, or at times we will assign it to another mode to conduct the investigation. And as you can see, our investigative reports are also, reporting. All of our investigations, we issue a report, regardless if there's a finding of bullying or not. This way, even if it's unsubstantiated, there's the opportunity to have the employee relation resources staff from our HR offices come in to offer training and to try to figure out what the original conflict was from the beginning. Reporting for all of MDOT is handled by the Office of Diversity and Equity here at headquarters, and we collect and review the DBM annual reports from each of our modes, and we combine them for submission to DBM. And you'll see in the chart below that in 2021, out of 26 complaints, there were 3 findings of bullying. That was 2 at SHA, 1 at MDTA. And then in 2022, out of those 37 complaints and those 8 findings of bullying, there was 4 of those came from SHA, 2 from MVA, and 2 from MTA. The disposition of those cases with the finding of bullying included at minimum written reprimands, transfers, or some type of separation, either through termination or resignation in lieu of termination. And I believe that's the end of our overview.
Okay, I guess at this point, we'll see if there are any questions. Does Adrienne Monroe want to say anything, or is she just here for questions?
She's here to catch any questions that I can.
Okay, so I'll actually begin with a question.
Sure.
When reports, when you get complaints and the findings are, there is no finding, it's unfounded. You said you still write, there's a report that's written. What happens with that report? Who sees it? Is it a public report?
No, it is not. It is not a public report. And Adrienne, go ahead. I stepped on you.
Oh,
Sorry.
It's okay. It's not it's an internal report that goes to the administrator of that mode or to the director, or sometimes both, just so that they are aware of the determination. And we may still recommend, that they defer to EER, employee-employer relations, to offer some type of training to resolve any conflicts that may still be present if there aren't any findings of bullying.
Okay, thank you for that. And then do you have specific investigators who investigate this, or is this something that the 3 of you work on? Who investigates each complaint?
So within TSO, I am the EEO program manager who's assigned to investigate all bullying complaints. And each mode has their own civil rights officer or fair practice officer who investigates the bullying complaints. So that office, the fair practice officers, has someone designated for investigating those complaints.
Right.
Okay.
Also, to pick up some of the additional work that we sometimes get, because as I mentioned, we sometimes get referred or have to oversee investigations of some of the modes. I also have 2 contractual retirees that agreed to come back to lend their expertise to help oversee and to do some of those investigations as well.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I see we have a question from Delegate Harrison.
Yes, thank you. So you had 26 and 37 complaints and just a few findings. The individuals who made the complaints, how then are you working with those individuals so that they feel comfortable in their workplace? Because the bottom line is that feelings are fact to the person who's feeling them. And if the individual feels as though they've been harassed, and this is in most cases, individuals feel as though they have been harassed, so they're not comfortable in their workplace, then how are you working with them to ensure that they're comfortable in their workplace, they feel safe, that they feel heard, and not just swept under because you didn't have a finding?
Right. One of the things that we do, that's why when we do the investigative report, one of the things that we do is we make sure that even if there is no finding of bullying, that we have the department work with someone in employee relations to try to get to offer whatever resources they have. Sometimes it's mediation, sometimes it's training on communication or how to better manage people so that they could get to the bottom of what that issue is. Because typically, I mean, you're absolutely right. By the time individuals believe or feel that they've been bullied or mistreated at work, by the time they decide to come to us with the issue, they're like at the wit's end. It's like, you know, they're done. They don't have anywhere else to go. So we recognize that. So even if there is no finding of bullying, we try to make sure we bring whatever resources we have to bear to help them work out that situation. And sometimes it depends on the individual situation. Sometimes after employee relations works with them and there's no resolution, folks may ask to be transferred to another office or something. So it's all very case specific, I would say.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to ensure that that employees are not feeling as though they are being punished for speaking out or for having whatever distress that they're having in that position. And so yeah, moving them. I understand that personnel issues are challenging in and of itself, and working through those. But my concern is always with the person, and that person, whoever files that complaint. And so I just want to ensure that they feel heard, that they feel supported, and yeah.
And Delegate, I want to say one of the things that we always make clear when we go in to do investigations is we let everyone know that our office, the way we come in as an independent, we try to be independent. We're not taking any sides. We're collecting facts, and then we look at everything all together at the end. Because I mean, it is very difficult. You're right. For the individual involved, feelings are facts.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions for MDOT before we move on? Senator Lamb, Chair Lamb?
Yeah, I have one brief question. Thank you. I know the numbers you showed were really only from 21, 22. They seem to be increasing from 21 to 22. Obviously only 2 data points there, so I'm not trying to raise a huge red flag here, but do you have any of the trend data going back a few years before that to be able to give us a sense of is this just kind of a normal up and down swing, or
Right.
has it been trending upward?
We do have that data. I just don't have it at my fingertips. I can make sure to provide that for the committee after we jump off. We can send you what that is. In talking with staff, we believe that the increase came from the transition of everyone back to work and the stressors that came with that after COVID. During that 21-22 period, everyone was kind of fully back at work, coming off of 100% telework. We believe that that was one of the contributors to that, but we can definitely provide you with that data.
Okay.
Yeah, and we may have to go back a little ways because, as like Tracy said, because of COVID, those numbers may even be skewed over the last couple of years. So we'll try to get you that information.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. If we have no further questions, we'll move on to USM. We have George Samuel, the Director of Human Resources, with us. George, thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. Good morning, Senator Lamb, Delegate Attar, and members of the Joint Fair Practices and Personnel Oversight Committee. My name is George Samuel, and I am the Director of Human Resources for the University System of Maryland. The USM is comprised of 12 higher education institutions and 3 regional higher education centers in Maryland, each with the president as chief executive officer under the governance structure of the USM Board of Regents. Policy is one of the primary governance instruments of the Board of Regents as established by Maryland law. The Board of Regents create and approve USM's personal policies, and the institution's presidents implement and administer the policies on their campuses. One such personal policy approved by the Board of Regents is the USM policy on professional conduct and workplace bullying. This policy underscores the USM's commitment to maintaining a workplace in all forms at all institutions that are free from harassment and workplace bullying. The USM policy establishes an expectation that employees treat each other with dignity, respect, and professionalism. The policy prohibits persistent, severe, or pervasive conduct by employee toward another employee that is intended to attack, publicly humiliate, sabotage, undermine, harm, or otherwise interfere with the individual's work. The prohibition extends to various online activities that are similarly intended to harm other employees, also known as cyberbullying. An employee that violates this policy is subject to discipline. In addition to the defining types of conduct and behaviors that may constitute workplace bullying, this policy also states that bullying is not such as a manager's legitimate justified conduct in supervising employees through coaching, counseling, and feedback intended to improve an employee's conduct or performance, and the exercise of management's prerogative to appoint, promote, transfer, or reassign an employee, and to direct or assign work, and to determine the methods and means by which a unit's function will be carried out. As with all USM personal policies, each institution is responsible for implementing the policy under the authority of the president or designee. Each institution maintains a website with information on personal policies and procedures that are applicable to their employees. And each institution is responsible for training their employees pursuant to the requirements of various federal and state laws and regulations and certain USM policies. All of the USM institutions provide regular sexual harassment training to their employees in accordance with state law and requirements of Title IX. These institutions-based training cover all forms of harassment, including workplace bullying and cyberbullying. If a USM employee has a harassment or bullying complaint, they have several options to bring a written complaint forward for investigation and resolution without fear of retaliation. Employees are always encouraged to discuss concerns or issues they have with their direct supervisor, who is often the person that is best equipped to quickly resolve disagreements or disputes that can arise between employees in the workplace. Depending on the nature and severity of the dispute, the supervisor may involve institution's human resource office or the provost office, an ombudsperson, or another office for assistance in resolving the matter. If an employee believes they are being bullied based on protected class characteristics such as age, ancestry, color, creed, gender, identity, marital status, mental or physical disability, national origin, religious affiliation, beliefs, or opinion, sex, or sexual orientation, there are several avenues to pursue their complaint. Employees can file a grievance under the USM's statutory grievance procedure, which is structured in a way that enables a thorough and timely investigation as required by Title IX regulations for certain type of complaints. Alternatively, the individual can file a written complaint with Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the Office of Statewide Equal Employment Opportunity Officer. Each office has its own procedures and guidelines. In summary, the USM policy on professional conduct and workplace bullying enables the USM institutions to keep their workplace free from harassment and workplace bullying, and hold employees who engage in bullying conduct to account. That concludes my written testimony. Any questions?
Yes, I'll begin with a question. I know, so you said it's difficult to track complaints. Do you have any data you can provide us? If you don't have it now, just so we have an idea of how many, or you just have no idea? Or can you send afterwards a breakdown? I guess it would have to be from each institution. I don't know how.
Yeah, we could do a breakdown by institution. We don't have a central tracking system, but we could definitely track it with each institution. We could get those numbers, yes.
Okay, thank you. Please send that to us after.
Yeah, and I have some preliminary numbers. I mean, we did ask the questions to the institutions, and for the past 12 months, we have roughly 46 complaints.
Do you know how many of those were founded or unfounded?
No, we'll have to actually get that breakout for you.
Okay, thank you.
But to put that in perspective, we have roughly 42,000 employees.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I don't believe so.
No, thank you. That was very comprehensive.
Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda, we have DPM. We have Sydney Kolner here, Executive Director. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Cindy Kolner. I'm the Executive Director of DBM's Office of Personnel Services and Benefits. Next slide, please. So we are all the other state agencies. You just heard from MDOT and USM. We have about state personnel management system comprises about 64 agencies in the executive branch. Our bullying policy has been in existence since January of 2017. It was negotiated with the state employee unions, and it is very, very similar, if not exact, to what MDOT has, since we're both in the same collective bargaining arena. This is our statement of intent. I won't read it, but it's there. Next slide, please. This is how we define bullying. I think it was very similar to what MDOT had indicated. Intentional, persistent, malicious, unwelcome, severe, pervasive conduct that harms, intimidates, offends, degrades, or humiliates an employee. And we go on to give some examples here. Next slide, please. Our bullying complaint process, even though it isn't defined here on the slide, it is a bifurcated process. Whereas employees can file a bullying complaint based on a protected status claim, or if they feel like they've been bullying based on a protected status, similar to what George had just mentioned, or if they're just claiming they're being bullied and not on the basis of a protected status, they can also file a bullying complaint as well. The protected status complaints are reviewed and investigated by our agency EEO offices. The non-protected status complaints are reviewed by agency HR and employee relations staff members. The process can be initiated by an individual being bullied, a witness to the bullying, or can even be initiated through an anonymous complaint. The complaint is filed with an agency head or appointing authority. There's no particular form or format that is required. Once the agency receives a complaint of bullying, there's a requirement that they investigate, interview the individual who indicates they're being bullied, any other witnesses, obviously the bully as well, consider mitigation, and impose discipline if warranted. We do require the issuance of a written decision, and much like MDOT, that written decision is not widely shared. It's shared with the executive teams in the agency, the agency head and appointing authority. Next slide, please. Recently, the unions, AFSCME and MPEC, have expressed concerns about our bullying policy. The unions have alleged that the agencies are not doing thorough investigations of complaints, or that they're not meeting with the complainants as they're doing the investigation, and they're issuing findings that include very little details. So we took those concerns very seriously. And next slide, please. We did a little bit of an ad hoc review and outreach to agencies. We got copies of their reports and their findings as a result of the complaints. And we did find that what the unions were saying was true for the most part, that we could do better as it related to the bullying complaints. And as a result, we have drafted some additional guidance to go to agencies. Right now it's in a draft form. We hope to have that out by the end of the year, just to talk again, because individuals investigating the complaints aren't necessarily trained investigators that came up with in the MDOT question to MDOT. So we are putting out some additional guidance to help agencies as they work through these bullying complaints. Next slide, please. We do have future actions. We do plan to continue to lean in with the unions and listen to any future concerns that they have about the bullying process. We really hope that the additional guidance will tighten up the process and eliminate any concerns about the bullying that's taking place in the workforce. We do consider bullying a major issue in terms of for retention. Not that it's very persuasive. We do take it very seriously. If we want to retain employees, we have to maintain a bullying-free workplace. And part of that is part of ensuring that is taking place is that the administration is planning to launch a culture survey. We are in the process of contracting a vendor to do a culture survey of state personnel management system as well as MDOT employees to get a baseline of what employees perceive the culture to be of the state workforce. And we hope to make that an annual survey, and that will help us make improvements to employee work life for state employees. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have. Oh, on the data, I know you're going to ask about the data. I was hoping to have data for you today. Calendar 23 year to date. Was not able to get all of that together for today, but I anticipate having it to you shortly.
Just a question to follow up on that piece. Can you give us a sense of time frame?
I think maybe a week or two. I have the smaller agencies have reported out a lot of data already. Again, I was hoping to have it for you today. I think maybe in the next week or two. And we do annual data collection. So we do have past year's data that I've submitted. I also forgot to mention that we do annual, we have bullying training that we give employees. It's every 2-year requirement, much the same as MDOT. So.
Okay. If it's beyond 2 weeks, if you could just let us know and get back to us, that would be helpful. Just keep us updated.
Absolutely.
I did have a follow-up question on, it looked like because of some of the union issues that were brought up, that you did a survey of reports from a few select agencies, I guess. Do you do that type of, or not survey, sorry, review of reports from these, looks like 5 or 6 agencies? Is that something you do regularly, or was that just because of some concerns that have been brought up?
It was a direct result of the concerns brought up by the unions. It's not something that we do regularly.
Okay. And why did you pick those specific, it looks like 7 departments?
Well, they're our largest departments, and I do believe that some of the union flagged some of the concerns directly with those departments. So we were just following up on some of their concerns and then doing a scatter shot of other large departments.
Okay. So those departments were inclusive of the primary ones that the union brought up.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, any other last call for questions here? If not, I think we can move on the agenda, but before Assistant Secretary Bridges leaves, I was contacted by the union who is concerned about some of those numbers and whether those numbers that were presented in the MDOT slides are fully inclusive of everything that they've been hearing. So just a heads up on that. So, if you can get back to us with some numbers, and, we'll try to navigate why some of the numbers seem inconsistent with what they think that they should be. We'll follow up.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll do that. And we'll make sure that we break it down by different modes as well.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, seeing no further questions, Chair Attar, we okay to move on in the agenda? All right. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda list. This is the annual statewide equal employment opportunity report. This is with the Department of Budget Management. And we have Ms. Nicole Webb, our statewide EEO coordinator, who has joined us this morning. Ms. Webb, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you as well, Senator Lamb. Again, good morning to you, Co-Chair Lamb and Co-Chair Attar, and members of the Joint Committee. For the record, my name is Nicole Webb, and I currently serve as the statewide EEO coordinator. I will be providing an overview of the state's EEO program, data on our most recently published annual statewide EEO report, and finally, information regarding progress that the program has made beginning January 1st, 2023 to date. Next slide. The Office of the Statewide EEO Coordinator is under the authority of the Secretary for the Department of Budget and Management. The OSEEOC administers and enforces the state's EEO program, monitors the program for statutory and regulatory compliance, reviews agency EEO decisions on appeals, conduct whistleblower investigations, and prepares the annual statewide EEO report. The state's EEO program is data-driven so that we may identify trends and monitor outcomes. To accomplish this goal, we continue to use the agency complaint tracking process with a uniform complaint form and a comprehensive database system. We require agencies to annually set goals and develop plans to ensure that protected group members are represented and the personnel practices are not discriminatory. Finally, the OSEEOC coordinates professional development opportunities for statewide EEO professionals to ensure they are regularly educated and trained in applicable laws, policies, procedures, and practices. Next slide. So next, I will cover the requirements for a principal unit's EEO program. So next slide, please. Thank you. So each principal unit shall establish an EEO program to identify and eliminate discriminatory practices and policies. The head of each principal unit is required to appoint a fair practices officer who is an assistant secretary or an employee of the unit with stature similar to that of an assistant secretary. The head of each principal unit and the fair practices officer should regularly communicate the unit's EEO policy and program requirements to job applicants and employees. This can be accomplished by way of publishing EEO information on the unit's webpage, forms, new hire orientation documents, training, and providing coaching and guidance to managers, supervisors, and staff as needed. Next slide. The Fair Practices Officer is responsible for implementing the unit's EEO program. They work in collaboration with the head of the principal unit and management staff to ensure policies and procedures are EEO compliant. They investigate complaints that involve an EEO protected basis and resolve as appropriate. The Fair Practices Officer serves as the immediate supervisor for the EEO officer and coordinates their daily work activities. Next slide. The EEO officer is responsible for monitoring all personnel actions adopted by the unit to ensure that they are taken without regard to any non-merit factor. An EEO officer also conducts investigations into complaints, writes final written reports, designs, develops, and facilitates EEO training. They attest that policies and procedures are consistent with statutory requirements. Next slide. The ADA coordinators are also a part of the EEO team and work with management and staff as well as job applicants to facilitate the interactive process when there is an accommodation request because of that employee or job applicant having a disability and limitations that require modifications to the recruitment process or work environment. The ADA coordinator provides training to agency staff on applicable disability laws, policies, and procedures. They also ensure that all workspaces are accessible and compliance requirements are met. Next slide. Employees and job applicants that wish to file EEO complaints must do so in writing with the head of their principal unit or EEO officer within 1 year after first knowing of or reasonably knowing of an alleged violation. Within 30 days, the EEO officer is required to conduct a thorough investigation and recommend a proposed decision to the head of the principal unit. The head of the principal unit issues a written decision on the complaint and may grant any appropriate relief. Next slide. Employees have the right to file either an EEO complaint under section 52-203 of SPP or a grievance in accordance with the state grievance procedures in Title 12. In addition to filing an EEO complaint, employees may elect to file with an external regulatory agency. Next slide. The OSEEOC enforces the EEO appeals process. Therefore, within 10 days after receiving a decision from their principal unit's EEO office, an employee may elect to file an appeal in writing to the Secretary of the Department of Budget and Management or the designee, which would be me, the statewide EEO coordinator. The appeal and decision are reviewed and investigation is done if needed within that 30 days. Next, a written decision is issued to the complainant and the respondent meaning the agency in which the employee works. If there are no violations, the case is dismissed. If a violation occurs, the secretary or designee shall take appropriate remedial action. The decision of the secretary or designee is final. Next slide. All right, so next I'm going to share some data specifically from FY 2023 from the Office of the Statewide EEO Coordinator. So next slide. All right, so in fiscal year 23, there were a total of 531 EEO complaints reported, and the most common basis was sex/gender and retaliation. 395 of the 531 complaints were filed internally with the agency's designated EEO office. Of the 395 internal complaints, 20 were appealed to the Office of the Statewide EEO Coordinator. While clearly, an increase in EEO complaints from FY 2022 to 23 occurred, 74% of the EEO complaints were filed internally in FY 23, opposed to 68% in FY 22. This is a possible indication of employees trusting the internal EEO complaint process to address their concerns. In addition, there was a decrease in appeals filed in FY 23 compared to FY 22. Again, this is another possible indication of employees not opposing the principal unit's EEO's office final decision pertaining to their complaint. Next slide. All right. So the Office of the Statewide EEO Coordinator is responsible for enforcing the Maryland whistleblower law in the executive branch of state government. The purpose of the law is to further good government and ensure that no supervisor, appointing authority, or the head of a principal unit does not take or refuse to take any personnel action as reprisal against an employee who makes a protected disclosure. A complaint can be filed under SPP 5-309 or the grievance procedures under Title 12 in SPP. An employee of the University System of Maryland may elect to file a complaint under SPP 5-309 or a grievance under Title 13 of the Education article. A complaint under this law must be filed within 6 months after the complainant first knew of or should have known of the violation. The Office of the Statewide EEO Coordinator has the responsibility to investigate these complaints within a 60-day time frame. And once a decision is concluded, it is issued to the complainant. That complainant then has 10 days after receiving the decision from the OSEEOC to file an appeal with the Office of Administrative Hearings, OAH. OAH has 60 days for their appeal review, and their decision is final. So in FY23, there were a total of 13 complaints filed, 11 were no probable cause, and 2 were withdrawn. In the event that an employee wishes to withdraw a complaint, we do have a best practice in the OSEEOC to have that employee put that withdrawal request in writing so that we can have it for our record. Next slide. So in FY23, there was a reduction in sexual harassment complaints when compared to FY22. However, there was an increase in probable cause findings for FY23 opposed to FY22. This could possibly be attributed to the altering of the definition of harassment and sexual harassment that went into effect by way of the passing of Senate Bill 450, where the removal of the severe or pervasive standard went into effect, effective October 1, 2022. Next slide. So next, I will provide you with statistical and demographic data on the state's workforce for FY22. The data going forward in the presentation does not include higher education institutions. Also note that the Office of the Statewide EEO Coordinator is currently working to produce the FY23 annual statewide EEO report, which is why I'm covering FY22. So next slide, please. In FY22, the state's workforce consisted of 57% of employees that identified as female and 43% of employees that identified as male. Next slide. The state's workforce is diverse with 48% white, 45% African American, 3% Asian, 2% Hispanic or Latino, 2% multiracial, and less than 1% that identify as Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander and American Indian / Alaskan Native. It's also important to note that 253 employees did not disclose their race. Next slide. Next is a comparison of state employees to the civilian labor workforce. White males and females represent a higher proportion of the civilian labor workforce than the state government's workforce, while minority males and females represent a higher proportion of the state government's workforce than the civilian labor workforce. Now, although not reflected in the chart, I did want to provide some additional information. With the exception of the protective service worker sworn EEO job category, African Americans represented a higher proportion of the state's workforce than the civilian labor workforce. Minorities held 38% of the state positions classified as officials and administrators, which is 5% higher than the civilian labor workforce. White males represented a higher share of the state government's sworn protective service workers at 62.9% than the civilian labor workforce, which was a total of 37.7%. Next slide. Next, this chart reflects the total percentage of new hires. Total percentage of women as new hires was 59%. There has been a trend from FY 2017 to FY 22 in which women were hired at a higher percentage than men. Next slide. Next, this chart reflects the total percentage of minorities as new hires. In FY 22, 51% of new hires identified as minority. There has again been a trend from FY 17 to FY 22 in which minorities were hired at a rate of 50% or higher. Next slide. Next, this chart reflects the average salaries by gender and race. The average state salary was $68,405. The average salary for men was $71,675 and women $65,135, a difference of $6,540. There is an average pay difference between white and African American employees of $11,483, which could possibly be attributed to the jobs that they hold. White employees, hold 62% of the officials and administrative positions, opposed to African Americans with 28%. White employees hold 50% of the professional level positions, opposed to African Americans with 32%. Other minority groups are highly represented in the officials and administrators positions, as well as the professional category, which could possibly attribute to their salaries being higher than the average state salary. Next slide. Next, this chart reflects gender and race representation by job category. Women have more representation than men in the officials and administrators and professionals positions, which have higher salaries, but the average salary is most likely driven down by the significant proportion of women representing administrative support positions. African American average salaries are similarly driven down by heavy representation in service maintenance and administrative support categories. Next slide. Next are the percentage of promotions for women. In FY 2022, women accounted for 56% of promotions. There has been a trend from FY 17 to FY 22 in which women receive promotions at a rate of 49% or more. Next slide. Next are the percentage of promotions for minorities. In FY 22, minorities accounted for 48% of promotions. Hispanic and Latino came in at 3.7%, multiracial 4.3%, Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander at 0.08%, Asian at 5.6%, American Indian and Alaska Native at 0.25%, and African American 86%. Next slide, please. Next are the total suspensions and terminations captured for FY 22, and I'll start with suspensions. African American employees received more suspensions in comparison to white employees. However, they also occupy more positions subject to progressive discipline, which could account for some of the differences in the numbers. Next, in terms of the involuntary terminations, we are currently looking into the total numbers of terminations for FY 22 because we're really unable to explain this increase at this time. And I will say, in terms of the work that the OSEEOC is doing to ensure that personnel actions such as suspensions and terminations are being done absent of any non-merit factor, we are ensuring that the EEO officers are monitoring these personnel actions prior to them taking effect. So when we initiate our auditing practices, that is something that we look closely at to ensure that they're in compliance. Next slide. Next is the progress that the OSEEOC has made beginning January 1st to date. Next slide. We have initiated a total of 11 agency EEO compliance audits. We've concluded 5 and we have 6 currently pending. We've also redesigned the content on the OSEEOC webpage so that it's more comprehensive and user-friendly. We are continuously publishing our quarterly EEO Connection newsletter, which is shared statewide, also with the USM schools. We were able to host 2 statewide EEO group meetings this year that were attended by 60 plus professionals. That's within state government, USM schools. And I do want to note that Secretary Grady was in attendance at the July 27th meeting, and many of the EEO professionals were very excited to hear from her and her commitment to the program. We've also partnered with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights to provide, for the first time ever, 2 sessions on the basic investigative techniques and discrimination law theory trainings. So we offered that in early January and then again in July. Next slide, please. And after facilitating our own internal climate survey amongst our EEO professionals, we did receive very helpful feedback for us to identify what the program needed, what professionals needed in order to be successful. So as a result of that feedback, we did develop a lot of new trainings, as you can see on the screen, the different titles of the different trainings and sessions that we've held throughout the year. Anything that has new indicated to the right indicates those that we've designed, developed, and implemented. So they have gone over well with the community. Next slide. These are just some additional trainings that we've offered throughout the year that have been well attended by the professionals. Next slide, please. We've also developed an electronic survey tool to capture training participant feedback to incorporate program improvement. So after every training, we certainly review the feedback to see how we can improve going forward. And finally, as the statewide EEO coordinator, I do have the pleasure of serving as an active member and commissioner for the Maryland Commission on Disabilities and Rebuilding State Government Committee. So with that being said, next slide. This concludes my presentation, and I can take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Webb. I'll kick us off with some questions. I noticed in one of your slides, I think it was slide 24, that had a table, 2 tables of suspensions and terminations.
Yes.
It looks like the terminations went significantly up in FY22 from like 200, 300 in that ballpark to all of a sudden over 800. Are you able to account for what took place there?
Again, we're looking into these numbers to really understand, what the difference was from the previous years. I'm not able to explain the increase at this time, but I can certainly get back to you once we do the research to look into those numbers.
Okay, yeah, if you could, I think that would be informative, and it's also just important because it looks like, that's like a almost 4-fold increase, sometimes more, and that's probably important to have a grasp of what's going on there.
Absolutely.
My other question had to do with, I guess some of the numbers. There seems to be some significant gaps when you compare, for example, men to women, both in pay and also in the proportion of each of those in kind of management roles and whatnot. Same thing with different racial breakdowns that you had provided earlier. I'm wondering if there are any activities that the department is undertaking to try to address some of this. I also noted, I think you said that the public safety personnel where you said about 62%, 60% were white, and the national trend is 30-some percent. Is that right?
Let me see if I can go back to that slide.
I don't know if it was in the slide. I think you had mentioned something like that. And while you're looking that up, I guess maybe this is the question for the secretary then, what are we doing to try to address some of these disparities, particularly the disproportionate number of women and people of color in some of these lower paying roles? And how do we get a higher ratio of women and individuals of color into some of those roles, right?
Thank you, Senator Lamb. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I froze up for a second. Thank you for the question, and I invite actually some comments from Cindy Colner too, our head of HR for the state. I agree with you that this is a little bit outside of Nicole's portfolio. I really have appreciated working with Nicole these last several months, and her team's analysis of this data is really enlightening for us at DBM, and particularly for me as a new leader here, particularly as we think about our efforts to rebuild government, to recruit and retain. Obviously, we're also focused on internal promotions as part of that work. I think that Nicole's data shows, as you're pointing out, a clear disparity still. And I had asked Nicole actually to check some data from a few years earlier to see whether those gaps between male and female, white and African American with regard to salary and also levels of hires look very different from, say, 2019, and they don't. State hasn't really made progress during that period, 19 to 22. So to me, that's a clear signal that there's a lot of work to do. I think it's within our HR function and working with our HR leadership across the agencies as we're working on various strategies to rebuild government through recruitment, retention, internal promotions, career paths, et cetera. We need to be doing it with an eye on equity and diversity and, initiatives around how to recruit and promote in ways that will enhance the diversity at these levels and begin to make progress on closing those salary gaps in particular. So I think that's a key takeaway. For me as secretary, I do anticipate that we'll be working on some initiatives very specific to enhancing diversity. I think, these first few months, our focus has been so heavily on just recruitment, retention, turning around net hires so that we're adding to the workforce rather than continuing to decline. And I think it's past time that we need to turn our focus to also fleshing out specific initiatives around enhancing diversity while we're doing that. Nicole mentioned that she's part of an internal working group in the administration that's really focused on rebuilding government. I think we'll be calling on her for expertise as well as some of our HR leadership across the agencies for best practices. In particular, we mentioned this in previous hearings with this committee, but we have the task force to modernize HR is well into its work and working on a final report. I need to follow up with the task force to see whether they've actually identified so far through their work best practices or key initiatives that we should be recommending going forward. And I want to make sure that that's definitely an area of emphasis in the report. They're still working on their recommendations, but I do want to make sure that they're honed in on this issue in particular. And actually want to make sure that they see some of this data from Nicole. Nicole mentioned she's finalizing the report for fiscal 23. And so we should have that by calendar year end. I'm eager to see that data. I don't imagine it's going to look dramatically different in the course of just 1 year. But I think we need to use the data to then build some initiatives as you're suggesting. Last thing I would mention is, and then I'll see if Cindy wants to share any particular initiatives that her team has been focused on in this regard. But I do want to mention that Cindy Colner is planning to retire as head of state HR at the end of December after a long and really committed career with state government. As we are launching now efforts to recruit for whoever's going to fill Cindy's shoes, which is a daunting task. This is certainly top of mind for me and my colleagues in the administration as we think about future leadership for state HR.
Yeah, before we get to Ms. Colner and her response, I think a few initial thoughts here, I guess. While I agree the recruitment and retention piece is really important, if the recruitment is in the same proportion that we've been seeing with some of these numbers that Ms. Webb just presented, we're actually not kind of digging ourselves out of this problem, right? And so, I think, and I haven't heard a specific initiative in what you kind of outlined that is really trying to address the shortcomings here. It would really kind of emphasize that we do need to try to address this, because while we have to recruit and retain and continue that effort, without some dedicated attention, we're going to continue along the current pathway with the proportions that we're seeing in all likelihood into the future. And it's only going to dig our hole even deeper in trying to, have better equity here when it comes to women and people of color. And so, I think the other piece here too is that it may be important to kind of work with the appointments office on this and Secretary Edwards, because particularly for some of the higher ranking roles, right, the higher management roles, a lot of those recommendations or resumes may come from the appointments office in how they're initially handled. And so, being able to kind of elevate some of those folks that are qualified, obviously, to make sure that they get before the right hiring authorities to look at them is really, really important. And if they're coming through the appointments office door, obviously we want to make sure that they also reach the appropriate hiring authority to be considered, right? And so, that's another, I think, piece of this to make sure that we're looking at when we're trying to hire some of the kind of middle, upper level management kind of leadership roles that we're seeing also that show some of the disparities there.
I agree with you more. Everything you said, I think we're almost saying the same thing. And, I will acknowledge that in our first several months, we haven't yet developed specific strategy around diversity and equity within the rebuilding government arena, but I think it's past time for us to do that. And that's definitely going to be a key focus for us.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Coleman, did you want to add to that? Congratulations on your soon-to-be retirement.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate your kind words, Secretary. No, I think you both are exactly on point. I think we in the task force are talking about doing some targeted outreach, which I think it needs to be done in this area, specific professional organizations to get to the minorities and women. And also I think the state needs to look at, and I believe it's on our radar as well, internal promotions and training. We have women and minorities at the lower level, but now it's time to look at promoting from within. So I know all of those things are on the secretary's top of mind, as she likes to say. So.
Great, thank you. Before we get to the other members, Chair Tar, any questions on your end?
Yes, thank you. So I share many of the same concerns and had many of the same questions as Chair Lamb, but I also want to know, I want to go back to the complaints. Out of 531 complaints, you said many of those were sex and gender related. Can you provide some sort of breakdown or more data around that? What was founded, unfounded, or a lot of the, I'm just concerned that there were so many complaints and many of them were for the same reason. So I know you may not have that data now, but if you can please follow up with us on more data about that and more information. I don't know if it would be related in somewhat. I know it's a far stretch, but from the numbers that we're seeing in terms of pay differences and things like that, and I would like to have a little bit more information about that if possible.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So that's all I had. I see we have a question from Delegate Harrison. I believe your hand was up first.
Thank you. First, I want to go to the whistleblower information, the complaints. And so it appeared as though, although complaints were filed in both 2022 and 2023, that, that nothing came of those. And I'm concerned that, I go back to, I'm sure you heard me say earlier that I'm always concerned about the people and the employees and those individuals who find the strength and the courage to step up and complain, only to find that that their complaint or that they have been summarily dismissed. And so out of both of these, there was never anything that was found. And the one, both of them, no probable cause. And then 2023, two of them were withdrawn. And So, my question would be, is that because they felt as though nothing was going to happen, or, did they feel quote unquote bullied afterwards that they made that? And then I don't know that I understand the one dismissed due to lack of jurisdiction. So if you can address those, and then I do have another set of questions after that.
Sure. Thank you for your question. So for FY 2022, a total of 10 complaints, 9 no probable cause, and the one that was dismissed due to lack of jurisdiction, that individual was not employed with a state government agency within the executive branch of state government or a USM school. So they were employed with a private employer. It's just that they failed to reach out to us first to really understand the eligibility requirements for the Maryland whistleblower law. So the reason for the dismissal was because it was not a state government employee. They weren't eligible to file the Maryland whistleblower law complaint with us.
So let's just say they're a contractor with the state. Then are you saying that contractors then, because they're not actually employed by the state, but rather by a private entity, that they have no right to file a whistleblower if they see something? Is that what that means?
No, I'm not saying that. Let's say, for example, I can't recall exactly where the person worked, but the person was with a private company, separate and apart from state government. Let's say, for example, they worked for McCormick and Smith. They were totally outside of the jurisdiction, but we did not know that until we actually received a complaint. It was vetted through our administrative contact. And once we looked at everything and determined, like, no, this is not something that falls within our purview, but we still record it and we still process a letter to administratively close it out and explain to them why it's not within our jurisdiction, and we refer them to other contacts as appropriate.
Okay. So they're not just totally dismissed, but they are offered another recourse, because it could very well be that individual has information that that if they were an employee would fall under that whistleblower. Correct.
So we do have a formal closeout process, whether it's our employee or if it's an individual that is not employed with us and eligible under the Maryland whistleblower law. Our formal process is to record the complaint once it comes in our tracking database. It's assigned to an investigator, and once the investigator reviews it and determines whether that person is eligible to file that Maryland whistleblower complaint with us and move forward or not, then next steps will be determined. So in the case of this one that was dismissed, it was determined that this person was not eligible to file under the Maryland whistleblower law. So they received a closeout letter explaining that they weren't eligible under the Maryland whistleblower law eligibility requirements, and then they were referred to other entities, such as the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights and the federal EEOC, based on the information that they had provided to us.
Okay, thank you.
So,
go ahead.
You also had a question about FY23 as well, correct?
Well, I'm just looking, and I guess maybe it was more of a general statement that people are filing complaints and then there's nothing that comes from it. And as I stated earlier, feelings are facts to the person who's feeling them. And if they believe that that they had a legitimate complaint about something, a whistleblower complaint, they're out of the 13, there's no probable cause, and then 2 were withdrawn. So it's as though, there's never any problems. And I don't know that that's necessarily true all the time. Not that I want to say that we have any major problems, by the way, but 13 complaints, 11 no probable cause, and 2 withdrawn. It just leads me to it gives me some concern that, again, people are being dismissed for what they believe to be true.
So what I can say to kind of add some context to the numbers is that while we may receive Maryland whistleblower law complaints and we go through the formal process of investigating and the individuals may not meet the requirements for it to be a substantiated Maryland whistleblower complaint, that does not mean that they may not have an issue that falls under, let's say, a personnel policy,
Okay.
you know, or practice. And when that does happen, yes, we close it out according to our Maryland whistleblower law process, but we do educate employees on what their rights are and other avenues that they can explore, because we always have to find an opportunity to educate employees on, you know, what their rights are, so that they can really understand why the complaint in which they filed with us was unsubstantiated. And I will say, for the most part, with the whistleblower complaints, most of the employees that come to us are pretty confident in the process, because we're truly separate and apart from their agencies. And they like the fact, well, they appreciate the fact, I should say, they've expressed to us that we investigate the complaint from start to finish. And it's not necessarily investigated within their agency and then coming to us on appeal. So, you know, for the most part, we have been pretty successful in terms of our interactions with staff that file these complaints, even if they're not happy with the final outcome. And again, they can file with OAH. And so far, OAH has upheld the decisions that we have concluded with our investigations.
Okay, that I understand now, because it just doesn't always fall under your particular category, but there really may be something, and you refer them to where they
Correct.
should make the actual complaint. Thank you so much for that. Regarding just kind of following up on Delegate Attar and the complaints under the sexual harassment, do we have any data as to whether or not these complaints are all across our state agencies? Do they fall mostly within any one or a few particular agencies? Do we have any kind of information on that?
So we do have additional data, but I can tell you confidently that the numbers are across
Okay.
various agencies. It's not one specific agency that has more, you know, than another.
Okay.
Nothing that stands out.
Okay. And I'm sorry, chairs, but I do have another follow-up on the pay gaps and the gender and the racial breakdown. And this actually may be for the secretary and not necessarily for Ms. Webb, but you know, and I'm probably going to be a little less diplomatic than Senator Lamb and others, but you know, obviously I'm African American, and so to see, and female, and so to see this data right here is very, very distressing to me. We all know that there's always been a pay gap in gender and pretty much racial, but when you look at this on page 20, this bar chart on page 20, it is so striking and actually heartbreaking to see this major gap. And then when we look at on the next page, the job categories, it's like all the Black folks are doing service. You know, they're cleaning the offices, they're clean, you know, service work or maintenance. And that's troublesome to me as well. So it appears as though the state has not taken as much care in ensuring that those people of color, particularly Blacks, have an opportunity at professional level positions. And so I know that that you are just coming in and you're working through this. But I'd have to say that this needs to be fixed in, you know, in the short term rather than the long term, because, you know, we don't want to come back next year and see the same numbers, basically. And then my question is, has the governor seen these numbers? Is the governor aware that most of the folks who look like him are, you know, cleaning the service workers or maintenance workers? Not that there's anything wrong with that type of a job, but it just seems as though I don't think that the governor would be happy seeing this, just like I'm not happy seeing it. And so I'm wondering, has he seen this information?
That's a great question, Delegate Harrison. Thanks for that. And I agree with you, and we are eager to get after this and make progress. To your question about the governor, that's a good question. This report, as you know, was issued under the Hogan administration last December, I believe, or beginning of January prior to the transition. I have not personally briefed him on this report from fiscal 22. Nicole and team and I are working on the updated report for fiscal 23. And we will be working closely with the governor and his team, along with my cabinet colleagues, to make sure folks understand the updated data that we'll be releasing under Moore Miller administration's first statewide EEO report, and hope to, that also be an impetus for our discussion around what will our strategies be in this next year to start to make progress on these trends that I agree with you are really troubling.
Do you personally go in and look at this? I know that the state government is huge and you're one person, and I understand that, but are you looking in these agencies yourself and seeing what's going on and where these gaps are and how we may be able to, so that when you do talk to the governor, you have something, a strategy of your own that you can suggest that is implemented? Because we've got to work on this. This is just, it's not acceptable.
Completely agree. I have to admit, I have not personally analyzed data at this level across the agencies. We have begun to analyze it for our own agency, DBM. We're one of the smaller agencies, but we are looking at it at DBM, and have had some discussions with some of my colleagues in the administration about, even if we can take a look at DBM, even in terms of how we're cutting the data and analyzing it as a sort of model or pilot for what we can do with some of the other agencies. I would say that our work on this is at the beginning stages. I don't want to convey that we're further along than we are, but it's a key priority, and I'm eager to make a lot of progress along with, as I mentioned earlier, the next leader who we recruit to head, this important function. It's an incredibly important function for state government, and this is going to be a key factor in our recruitment process and our decision around who next to lead the organization that Cindy's turning over for us.
Well,
I agree with you.
Thank you so much for that. I look forward to updated information.
Yep.
Looks like Senator Benson has her hand up. Go ahead, Senator Benson.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to voice the sentiments of Delegate Harrison. I was really blown away when this information was just given to us. It totally boggles my mind as to why we continue to be in this position where where African Americans are not given a fair share, and I'm talking also about people of color. It's just something that really needs to be addressed, and I'm hoping that we will seriously consider doing just that. So I voice her sentiments 150%. The other has to do with the fair practice officers. In some of our agencies, the fair practice officer basically is chosen by, in all of our agencies, the fair practice officer is chosen by the person who is of the chief. Sometimes it is the secretary or his designee. In a number of instances, I just want to remind you all that a lot of the problems that occur within some of these agencies are centered around the problems with the person who is in charge of the fair practice officer. And when I talk to these fair practice officers, they are saying that they're not really given an opportunity to do their job because they also have fear of retaliation. I'm hoping that you all will take some time to take a look at that to see if in fact that is something that's happening. And the other has to do with the report that was just given by Ms. Webb. I want to commend you and everyone for the presentations that you all have given us today. But if we could be sure to get a copy of that report, if it was given or if it was sent to us, I didn't receive it.
On that point, sure, we can definitely make sure the committee all has a copy of this report, which, as I mentioned, was released around last December or the beginning of January. The new report will also be released in the weeks ahead, and we'll make sure you get a copy of that. It is posted, I believe, on the DBM website, Nicole, but we'll make sure that the committee all has the PDF copy.
Yes, it is posted on the DBM website. And if I could, just Senator Benson, in response to the information that you shared, first and foremost, thank you for sharing the fact that some fair practices officers have expressed challenges. So I'm definitely noting that, and I'll start thinking strategically on how to address some of those concerns. But I did want to also share that one of the processes that this office has put in place is called the Employee Complaint Assistance Program, also known as ECAP. And the ECAP process is an administrative process that was created specifically by this office to assist fair practices and EEO officers in the various agencies in the event that there was a conflict of some sort in which, let's say, a complaint they received and some type of conflict was presented and they did not feel comfortable or confident in proceeding with that investigation. They could apply for the ECAP process through this office, and we could appoint a fellow skilled professional fair practices or EEO officer from another agency to step in on their behalf and conduct that investigation for that specific agency that has that conflict.
That is very comforting. That is very comforting. I'm very, very happy to hear that, because a lot of times the fair practice officer makes a decision and it does not agree with the person who is supposed to be his superior. And it creates a problem whereby the fair practice officer, there's a setup, and the next thing you know, the fair practice officer is gone. And that's happening, I can tell you.
Thank you.
I did want to follow up on that point, and I think, Ms. Webb, we've talked about this before, that, I have heard from whistleblowers that contend that, oftentimes they feel like the EEO officers embedded within the departments are more there to be almost the equivalent of the defense attorney for the departments, rather than being someone who is open-minded in receiving these complaints and trying to process and adjudicate them properly. And maybe you can speak to, what A, you have heard, and B, what steps you've undertaken to try to address that.
Thank you, Senator Lamb. And, going back to that conversation we had about a year ago, I do recall that. And since then, that conversation, along with the feedback that I received from our internal survey that we shared with the EEO professionals, that's why we designed so much training this year. And we've implemented so much training to continuously educate fair practices and EEO professionals on their true responsibilities to be impartial and unbiased parties, and to more so be educators on the part of management and non-management staff, because depending on how they present themselves and convey information is going to determine the perception of the staff. So I do think that we've made great strides in providing training, and we've even opened the trainings up to non-EEO staff and direct stakeholders. So therefore, even if you have employees who wish to hear that information directly from us, just to confirm that what they're hearing from their designated fair practices or EEO officers is accurate, we welcome them to participate in our trainings or reach out to us as well. So again, we're just trying to really do our best to provide regular trainings statewide. This year was truly a year where our target audience was on EEO professionals. But as we kick off 2024, we are trying to find creative ways in which we can market some of the trainings that we offer just to any employee who's interested in participating.
Okay, thank you. I think this was while Delegate Harrison was inquiring about some of the prior slides, but are there any common reasons for the several that were listed as no probable cause findings? Were there any common reasons among those?
Based on
no probable cause? Go ahead.
Sure. based on the investigations that were concluded, thorough investigations from start to finish, there was no evidence presented that substantiated that those whistleblower complaints met the requirements. And like I said, you know, those employees have the ability to file appeals with OAH, and those appeals that have gone to OAH thus far, OAH has upheld our decisions, and they are an independent, you know, party separate from our office as well.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Ms. Webb, I think that concludes your presentation, right? Your presentation included both the annual EEO report as well as wage and disciplinary disparity gap.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. If that's the case, I think we're at the chair's closing remarks. I think we're at the end of the hearing here. You know, I think some of the data that was presented just a few minutes ago, I do find troubling. You know, I think Delegate Harrison brought up some really, really important points here, as well as Senator Benson, about the need to chip away at this ongoing issue. And I think it does need to be part of this ongoing recruitment and retention effort, and really should be elevated, you know, as quickly as possible with that ongoing effort. I think, you know, to Delegate Harrison's point, I think the governor does need to be made aware of some of the tremendous disparities here, particularly for women and persons of color, that it's pretty disturbing that when you look at these numbers, most of the people that look like him are held in positions that are cleaning his floors. So, you know, I don't think that's right. And I think, you know, this committee probably expects to see some improvement in those numbers when we reconvene on this issue next year.
And thank you, Chair Lamb. I echo Chair Lamb's comments. It is extremely concerning, but I do want to thank everyone for joining us and for you to being here and giving us the detailed report. We look forward to follow-up from it, and hopefully follow-up moving in the right direction. We'd all love to see that data as soon as possible. So thank you all. I believe this concludes this meeting and our meetings before session begins. Correct, Chair Lamb? This is our last meeting, right?
This is the last meeting. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you all.
All right. Thank you.